the Canadian election. You're in Rochester, it's pretty close to Canada. This ripple effect was incredible. I don't want to belabor Canada because we have so much Americans, news to cover, but it's really unprecedented what happened up there, isn't it to you?
Well, back in November, it was very clear that after 10 years of Justin Trudeau, Canadians were ready to change, and they were going to put the Conservatives in power, and Pierre Poilievre was going to become the next prime minister. Donald Trump undid that all by himself. Yeah. One of my 8 children is a Canadian citizen. She's a lawyer there. And so we pay a lot of attention to matters in Canada, which is about 90 miles from where I am. This is a clear repudiation of Donald Trump. It is a clear statement about Canadian sovereignty. Now, let's be clear, the Liberals did not win a majority, 174 seats. They only got 154. So this will be a coalition government in order to continue. And I don't know how long it will last, but the Conservative candidate had tied his wagon to Donald Trump and tried very hard to undo that, and not that many voters were taken in. So I think this is an important development. I mean, all around the world, show me where Donald Trump is winning. He claims he's negotiating with China. The Chinese say, we're not talking to you. Where does this come from? I can't point to any place where his tariff threats and his threats to take over the Panama Canal, Greenland, etc., are producing any positives. But if the audience has it, put it in the chat. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, that's really true. Well, one thing in the chat that I want to point out off subject is GJ Thomas says, I read your book, David, in one sitting, a really good read. So one sitting. That's
well, thank you. That must be the Making of Donald Trump, because it was a pretty short book. It's about 57,000 words.
Okay. All right. Well,
the others are all about 110, 120,000.
He did it in one sitting, which a lot of people can't do with any book. But yeah, so going back to what you were just talking about, bias aside, looking at the successes in these first 100 days, and sending you congratulations and whatever else you say to celebrate the 100 days of the Donald Trump administration. When you look at these 100 days, there's not accomplishment that you can point to, even if you're a conservative. What are you happy about?
I did 3 overseas television shows this morning, and I got asked that question, and I can't point to an example of where he's done something that's made America better. Never mind great, better. I can show you that he's taken the best economy in the world, what The Economist magazine called the envy of the world last fall, and turned it into a troubled economy. He's putting all of our lives at risk with everything from laying off people at the Federal Aviation Administration to radically cutting back on food safety inspections, and putting crazy Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In charge of our whole federal health apparatus. Measles now has the pro-measles party. That is the Donald Trumpers, right. The pro-measles party. They're doing very well. So I guess if you're pro-measles, things are going well.
Things couldn't be better. But yeah. But like you're saying, I mean, if I made myself for a moment the most MAGA crazed person in America, and I was asked, what are you happy about? I don't know that I'd have an answer even in that guise. I mean, I don't see what they could even be happy about.
Well, the Heritage Foundation and Hillsdale College, both sort of out in space organizations on the far right, are both holding celebrations. But based on the interview I watched while I was waiting to go on one of the overseas TV stations with one of the prominent Trump spokespeople, who, like the press secretary, was notable mostly for her blonde, gorgeous looks and perfect white teeth, what I heard were 3.5 minutes of just lies. The economy was terrible shape, and now it's the best economy in the world. Billions of dollars of new investment is coming here. China is begging us to please offer them relief. They're just living in a fantasy world That's the way that they justify this. And I don't think you're going to see much change among Republicans until one of two or both of two key things happen. The Medicaid program, our federal health care program for poor people who are not 65 or older, and some people 65 and older qualify, but mostly it's for people younger than that, is being radically cut. You can be sure you're going to see TV reports sometime in the future where some mother says, my 8-year-old child, I'm just told, is going to die because they refuse care for her. They say that's too expensive, or it's this, or it's that. Or you're going to see the same sort of person saying, my widowed mother is the one who takes care of my children so I can hold my 3 jobs. And her cost of insulin just went from $25 a month to $1,000 a month. And her income is only $1,000 a month. And she's been not taking her full insulin and she's sick. These things are going to happen. And when they do, that's when you're going to start to see some of the poorly educated Republicans change their tune and realize that Donald Trump is not their friend. He is, in fact, very much against their interests.
Yeah. It's easy for them to say that, getting rid of DEI initiatives is great. They love that. But when that doesn't hit them at home, that doesn't hit them in the kitchen, in the bedroom, that doesn't hit them in the hospital, when the things that do practically matter to them change, that's when you're going to start seeing that distancing. And many of them live in red districts, and they're going to be calling red members of Congress, and those members of Congress are going to have to answer for it. And if it's not politically practical, it's not going to work out for Trump.
Well, and given what they apparently have been doing with the Social Security Administration, here's another nightmare scenario. You don't get your Social Security check. Now, Michael Lutnick, the billionaire commerce secretary, said, well, when people complain they didn't get their Social Security checks, that's when you're going to know they're the fraudsters, because it's the fraudsters who will call up to complain. My mother, her check didn't come. She just expects, well, I made a mistake, I'll get one next month. Yeah, because your son is a billionaire.
Yeah, right. Or son-in-law. It was his mother-in-law, but still the same idea. Like
right,
when your son-in-law is Howard Lutnick and he's a billionaire, and she's not going to call and complain. Of course she's not. She probably doesn't open the envelope in the first place.
Right. And so I expect what will happen is some people will not get their Social Security checks, and they'll go to complain. And what they'll hear in essence is, well, get in line. And by the way, we'll talk to you in 13 months. Because they're messing with these computer systems. They're also doing a couple of other very curious things. They got into the IRS systems, and they're apparently using the IRS systems to find people who are here subject to deportation. Well, I'm sorry. If these people are criminals who aren't paying taxes, why do you have IRS records on them?
That's right. That's great.
And at the same time, they're dismissing large numbers of the most sophisticated auditors at the IRS, who typically bring in $20 million for their annual work. Now, if you're in business and you have salespeople, and that's what you could argue the IRS auditors are, they bring in money. If you can hire people for an all-in cost, their salary of say $150,000 and their benefits and whatnot, maybe $220 total, who bring you in $20 million, the logical thing to do is go hire thousands more of those people until they're down to bringing in say $1 million for their $220,000 cost. No, they're dismissing these people. And this makes no sense. And then finally, we now have a version of the Trump tax bill, once again, overwhelmingly goes to the centimillionaire class, people with at least $100 million of net worth. And yet they're complaining about the debt growing too fast. Well, I'm sorry, if you think the debt's growing too fast, why in the world would you continue the existing Trump tax cuts for the rich, and why would you increase them? Makes no sense. And of course, what's going to get cast aside are Donald's promises that he's going to make Social Security income tax free, which, by the way, I'm in favor of. I think Democrats made a terrible decision when they agreed to tax Social Security benefits, and other promises that Trump made, because this is not about ordinary people. This is about Donald becoming our absolute dictator, He's threatening, or maybe it was last night, he's threatening the prosecution of pollsters because he doesn't like what they're finding. And that's all this is about. It's absolute power.
Yeah, he's tried to muscle Rupert Murdoch into changing their pollster because they're coming up with numbers at Fox that he doesn't like. I mean, if you don't like the election is rigged and now the polls are rigged, and the polls have no obvious meaning other than what we glean from them, but the fact that he is able or willing or inclined, I guess is the better way of saying it, to do these sort of things at the drop of a hat says all you need to know about. And that is something that dictators do. Ryan, thank you for donating to the show, has a question for David or a statement, but it says about the things you and I are just talking about. I've heard all these predictions of Trump's demise in his first term. I'll believe it when I see it, David. I think it's a fair question in that, even what I was just saying, well, these people are going to run into problems with, like your example of an 8-year-old son who's ill, and then they're going to have their Republican congressperson, they call their congressperson and say, my 8-year-old son's ill. And that man or woman is going to say, well, I can't support this bill because it's hurting my constituents. But that doesn't really happen, or it hasn't happened yet. Can you speak to what Ryan is saying?
Well, absolutely. First of all, I've never went around saying they'll be demised by Donald. I said in 2011 when he was running and dropped out once he got a new contract for his TV show, as I predicted. I've said all the way along that if Donald gets to the White House, he's never going to leave. And in all my coverage of Donald, going back close to 40 years now, the only mistake that I have any record of him ever acknowledging was when he said recently, I shouldn't have left the White House in 2021. And assuming he's healthy and alive, he's not leaving in 2029 peacefully. He's not going to say, wave goodbye and go off. If you think that, you just wouldn't pay attention 4 years ago. How much power Donald will be able to wield is going to be up to two sets of people. One is the courts, and Donald's taunting of the courts and suggesting I don't have to pay attention to the courts is not going to go well. The second is what happens in the elections a year and a half from now. Now, that's a long time, a year and a half from now. Yeah. But if the Republicans continue to hold on to Congress, hey, kiss your democracy goodbye, because they're not going to do anything to stand up to him. If the Democrats get control of the House, they can stymie Trump, but that's all they can do. If they can get control of the House and the Senate, now they can do a lot of things to rein in Trump. And let's remember, this isn't just about Donald. Donald has now changed the contours of what can happen. So J.D. Vance, Tom Cotton, and a host of others standing in line want to be president in the future. They want to be dictator in the future.
Josh Hawley among them too.
Yes, and absolutely, Josh Hawley. And we need to restore the faith and belief in democracy and the liberties of the people. The Republicans used to call themselves the party of freedom. And now look at what they're doing. They're the anti-freedom party. They're the pro-dictatorship party.
They're the not just the anti-freedom party, pro-dictatorship. They were the anti-Russian party forever and ever and ever. And look where they find themselves on that issue as well.
If I have to tell you, if when I was in junior high school and high school in Santa Cruz in the 60s, if a teacher had said, in the future, the day will come when a Republican president will say that he trusts the leader in the Kremlin and doesn't trust American intelligence agencies and aligns himself with the Kremlin against one of their countries they want to vanquish, I would have gone straight to the principal's office and said, hey, Mr. Jones or Miss Smith, is crazy. And yet here we are.
It's bizarre, and people are talking about using the word oligarchy, but that's where we can't just drop that word from the lexicon when that's what we're fighting in many ways, and that's what has seduced Donald Trump into his support of Putin in many ways as well. Let's talk a little bit about things that are happening here, newsworthy, and I want to talk about the civil rights lawyers that are leaving in huge swaths of them are leaving the Justice Department because the Justice Department has decided that they want to interpret what civil rights are, not what these employees and lawyers at the Justice Department have been doing. Tell me about the grave effects of this.
Well, what's going on here is that it's we poor oppressed white people, especially white men. We're the ones who are the victims here. And the Justice Department Civil Rights Office, which all the way back to Eisenhower has sought to enforce civil rights laws, is just being completely dismantled. And the attorneys there are walking away. At the same time, on the criminal side, the Justice Department is now pursuing people for personal reasons of Donald Trump, illegitimate reasons, and lots of people who are criminals are being let go. Donald, through pardons and commutations, has proven to be a great friend to big drug dealers, for example. It's gotten very, very little attention. Can you imagine if Joe Biden had given a pardon to one of the biggest drug dealers in the world, as Trump did recently, the kind of coverage there would be. And the object of this is to turn the Justice Department into a tool to go after anyone who tries to stand up to Donald Trump. And the people 100% responsible for allowing this to happen are the Republicans who control the Senate. They're the ones who confirmed Pam Bondi, an utterly corrupt individual who has total loyalty to Donald Trump and utter disregard for her oath of office, just as Donald does. And we have a system of advice and consent. For many years in the early days of the Republic, they didn't even hold hearings on candidates. It was just assumed whoever was appointed was a honorable person. But we now have dishonorable people all throughout the government, the FBI and other places. And the responsibility for that, beyond Donald Trump's choosing them as appointees, is 100% Senate Republicans. They control the advice and consent system.
And they gave us Pete Hegseth too. I mean, if you look at, I think you're always, if you're in the opposite party, if you support the opposite platform, and you have a president in office who's not the one you voted for, you're always going to get cabinet members who you don't like, who you have ideological problems with. But ordinarily, you rely on the fact that they're at least up to the job. And
Michael, absolutely. As long as they're competent,
right?
Then it's a question of policy. And sorry, your side lost.
Right.
That's the way the rule goes. But here you have people who are manifestly incompetent, who are in the case of Pete Hegseth, a serious threat to our national security. Now, last week when Kim was handling the hosting duties, I said that I hadn't written about this because Timothy Snyder beat it to me the morning I was sitting down to write it. There is going to be some kind of terrorist attack on this country. And I'm not talking about any false flag nonsense. I mean, we have enormous vulnerabilities now. And the Iranians, the Russians, somebody out there is going to realize that they have an opportunity to make trouble for us, the way Osama bin Laden did with his absolutely spectacular publicity stunt. There was no military significance to 9/11, but it certainly shook up the country in ways that he wanted and exposed all sorts of divisions. And somebody is going to exploit what Trump has done. We've backed down on our cybersecurity. We've dismissed some of the most talented and important people in national security because the bigot Laura Loomer doesn't like them. And we are vulnerable. And when it happens, you watch, Donald will use this as an excuse to try to further extend his power.
Yeah, and it's hard not to see how he's going to be able to do that because it's being facilitated by all of the people that have been put in place by him. There's another story I want to get to before we part ways, but I want to stay on this story about the Civil Rights Division. It was founded, like you said, the Civil Rights Division was founded really to protect Black Americans in the mid-50s, and then it evolved into protecting people with different biases based on race, on gender, on other things. over time. And now this administration is trying to dismantle it entirely and make it about protecting the police, in essence, right?
Right.
And I'm not being glib. That's exactly what's in what they're talking about. And so this is a very dangerous thing. They're getting rid of everybody who was in favor of DEI. This is at the Civil Rights Division. Let's get rid of everyone who's in favor of DEI, and we need to stop persecuting the police. They're the ones we're protecting.
I think it goes, the police are at the core of this, but it goes way beyond that. I mean, Donald Trump is a misogynist, white supremacist. He's a racist. He's been that way his whole life. He's literally had judicial proceedings where he's been found to have engaged in pretty crude and awful discrimination. He's been only fined for it as regulatory matter in the past, not in any other way punished for it. And Donald is doing what he, in his own mind, sees, which is so long as there are black, brown, Hindu, etc., people in the United States, they're a threat. That's his view of the world. And he is foursquare for white males doing whatever they damn well please. And they're going to remove everything in the way. Look at what they're trying to do at the African American History Museum, where they're proposing to close and remove various facts. The removal of photographs of, say, Jackie Robinson, who was a U.S. Army captain in World War II, from the internet, and black women pilots who flew newly made bombers and cargo planes from the U.S. to Europe so they could be used in the war there. They've been removed. And all of this is to rewrite our history. It's very incredibly Orwellian. You whitewash and redo the history and produce the effect that you want. And where are the Democrats about these issues? I mean, I watch Hakeem Jeffries get up there, and I'm sorry, it comes across to me the same way Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer often do, which is blah, 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 and oh, blah, blah, and you should be blah, 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 blah. By the way, did you notice footnote 15 on page 47 of our new report? Wake up, folks. Governor Pritzker, of the multi-billion-dollar Pritzker family in Illinois, Hyatt Hotels and other properties, he's being much more aggressive, and he is not AOC. He's not way over on the left. He is a moderate, middle-of-the-road person, but he does have principles and scruples. It's certainly way beyond anything the Republicans have shown. And the Democrats, they seem like deer in the headlights. They don't know what to do. They're frozen.
I agree with that to an extent. And I think that different Democrats have different roles, but I know what you're saying. And it's frustrating for so many people that we listen to and talk with because of the fact that they want to see something get done. I think Schumer and Jeffries, and I'm not being apologists of theirs, but I think that they realize how they are stymied in their daily work, and they're resigned to doing it the way they do it. Whereas the Pritzkers, the Slotkins, the Bernie Sanders, the Representative Ocasio-Cortezes, those people, even Chris Murphy, even Brian Schatz, people are speaking out from the Senate. Cory Booker, people said, oh, what does it matter, a 26-hour filibuster? What matters is if you don't have the votes and the ability to do things, you can get people inspired to organize and to demonstrate and to push back, which is what Pritzker called for in New Hampshire the other day. So while I definitely get the frustration, and I certainly personally would like to see a change in leadership, at least in the Senate, I understand that that different people take on different roles in these curious times.
Sure. But what the Democrats don't seem to have is a coordinated theory of what they should be doing and how to respond to Trump. And I understand that Donald is somebody who is completely outside the mainstream of politics. And we see that in how the Washington Press Corps, which I made it my whole life, I made sure I was not part of the Washington Press Corps. I'd go visit there, but I wouldn't live there. Turned down going to the Washington Bureau, both the LA Times and the New York Times. They don't understand how to deal with Donald. And the problem is the assumption that Donald is a politician with a different view. No, He is a career criminal, the third generation head of a 4-generation white collar crime family. They steal with contracts and lies and bullying. They don't do it with violence. And he's appallingly ignorant. And he does so many things that if they had been done by any previous president, including, say, George W. Bush,
Yeah,
all hell would have broken loose.
of course.
Donald goes to sleep at the Pope's funeral. And what are the stories about? He wore a blue suit when the protocol is you wear a black suit. There's something fundamentally wrong here in not understanding how to cover what Trump is doing and how. And as Steve Bannon has pointed out, by doing so many things at once, you can't cover all of them. You can't be aware of all of them. Nobody can do that. It's just too many things. So the Democrats need to come up with a real strategy. How are we going to persuade the American people you'd be better off with us?
Right.
And they need to learn marketing. And this is not a new rant for me or for many other people. You know, the Democrats just don't know how to market.
They do. They've had. I mean, you're right. It's one. They don't know how to do that. It's about messaging. The Republicans are great at messaging. They're great at the turn of phrase. They're great at the quick one-liner, and they have somebody who is now, has such a cult-like following that whatever he says is echoed across a chamber that is incredible, right? I mean, I always say this, like, if the other part of it is that Democrats don't like and haven't historically liked being told what message they need to spread. I always say this, Rush Limbaugh's listeners were called ditto heads and they took it as a compliment. If you called a Democrat a ditto head, they would say, whoa, what am I doing wrong here? Wait a second. Really? I'm not doing that. Right. And that's a built-in difficulty, a built-in obstacle.
Right. And there's two core issues here that underlie this. My economics trilogy, Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and The Fine Print, along with years and decades of my reporting on inequality, which I was out doing when nobody else was on a consistent basis, has been focused on how the changes in this country that reduced unions hurt 80% of all workers. At the peak, only 37% of private sector workers were in unions, but that was enough that 80% of workers benefited. And wages have come down severely in this country. When I was in the San Francisco bureau of the LA Times in the mid 70s, I lived in Santa Cruz where I grew up. I had neighbors who were captains of 747s and DC-10s. And in today's money, they were making well over $1 million a year when you adjust for inflation. They're making about $200,000 a year, which is well over $1 million now, 50 years later. The highest paid pilot at Delta 2 years ago was a first officer who worked every flight he could, and he made less than $500,000. When I was a teenager, and the San Jose Mercury hired me as a staff writer, in today's money, my base pay was $65,000 plus medical care at no cost. There was a pension plan. I just wasn't old enough to participate in it. You had to be 21. Paid vacation, right? All of those benefits. I talk to young journalists all the time who tell me they've been offered jobs at $30,000 a year. The reason wages came down was so we could redistribute $50 trillion upward to the top 10th of 1%, top half of 1%. This attack, by the way, in the 1%, I think is mistaken because half of the 1% are two-income couples who are both professionals. So a surgeon married to a successful lawyer, an accounting firm partner to someone who owns a business. That's half of the 1%. And when you look at the data, the bottom half of the 1%, their income is almost all labor. They own almost no stocks or bonds except in their retirement plans. So we need to really focus on the 10th of 1% and up crowd. That's where the redistribution has gone. If we'd had $50 trillion more distributed among the bottom 90% for over the last 50 years, my goodness, we'd be flush. People wouldn't be desperate. They'd be in much better shape. And so you combine that with America's long history of racism and making sure if you're white, you've got to make yourself sound superior, even if you're decidedly the opposite. And you get Donald Trump. And it's not just Donald anymore. I mean, if Donald goes away and J.D. Vance were to go away, that's not the end of this. This is now a permanent new condition that we need to address.
There's no question about that. And I do think when Donald goes away, that many of the people that became involved because he showed up in the first place will go away, but a lot of them are going to stick around too. And I do think, the analogy I always use is it's like when Tiger Woods is golfing, the world watches when he's in a golf tournament and the ratings plummet when he's not in a golf tournament. I mean, there are people that came to the sport because of him. That said, there are a lot of people that didn't stick around, don't stick around when he's not playing. And I think that'll happen with Trump a bit.
Before we go, Michael, if I can just crow about one little thing.
Please.
At least 14 years ago in 2011, I said what I'm about to say. I think I said it before then, but the oldest I can find in my files is 2011, when Donald, after he was humiliated by Obama at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, was out there. I said, if Donald believes in his own mind, sincerely, truly believes that he is the only person qualified to be president of the United States, that everyone else is an idiot and an incompetent, and that he really should run the whole world if he could. And I've been knocked for that in a number of places. I've gone into shows where people go, that's just so indicative of your crazy thoughts. You're deranged. Well, Donald, whether he butt dialed or intentionally did so, he called a reporter at the Atlantic magazine, which he hates with a passion, and ended up giving an interview in which he said, I run the country and the whole world. In other words, he confirmed what I've been saying for 14 years, that Donald believes he should dictate to the whole world. And
he talked about a third term in that article. He talked about a third term as well. He said it would be shattering if he had. And I wanted to talk about with you. And then I looked at the clock and I said, "Oh my God, we're still not."
If you want to do it, we got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, let's do that, because it's really important what he did. I mean, saying that I run the country and the whole world. By the way, he runs the whole world except for Canada. I think we learned last night.
Yes, well, we've seen that China very much takes its orders from Donald Trump. Not
at all. These are the words of dictators. And I remember being out in the country last year, interviewing people waiting in line to go into Trump events and saying, Donald Trump wants to be a dictator. I mean, these videos are on YouTube all over the place. Would you rather have Joe Biden as president or Donald Trump as a dictator? To a person, they all said Donald Trump as a dictator. They don't mind being dictated to in this way. And now he's saying, I run the world, the country and the world. This is outrageous stuff. And I don't know why they keep having mix-up between signal and telephone calls to the Atlantic, which is, they should learn that lesson too.
Well, so why wasn't the banner headline in the LA Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post this morning, Trump declares himself dictator? I mean, he did this in February 26th, as I pointed out in earlier shows, when he said he who saves his country violates no law. He reaffirmed that when the White House posted 3 times a picture of him wearing a regal crown with the line, long live the king. He hasn't made any bones about what he's doing here. He just hasn't said dictator. And while there's a lot of great reporting out of Washington, there's also a lot of garbage reporting. You know, the great Cy Hirsch once told me, he said, you pick up the front page of the New York Times and you can read the greatest journalism human beings have ever produced. Move over one column, pure crap.
Right.
And
his book Reporter was fantastic.
Yeah, you get great stuff next to garbage stuff, but the Washington press corps just simply doesn't understand who Donald is in terms of how to cover him. And I think they all know what he wants to be and do. They can't figure out within the conventions of journalism how to cover him.
But David, let me ask you this, because I was in Washington covering the beginning of his first term, and there was some great reporting, amazing reporting coming out of the Washington Post, particularly, and I remember thinking that there was going to be, and I was wrong, but there was going to be a cumulative effect to this honest, good reporting, and what he did, to the point where reporting doesn't matter, perhaps, is that he put in fake news and everything. He was able to immediately dismiss anything that came out that he didn't like.
Right. And that's one of Donald's, Donald is the greatest con man in the history of the world. And this is a good
Yeah.
example. He understands what he needs to do to achieve what he wants. And so there's no question that huge numbers of people, if anything is contradictory to what Donald says, it has to be a lie.
Right.
That if it appeared in the New York Times or the Atlantic or the San Francisco Chronicle, it has to be a lie. And these are people, of course, who don't read or pay attention to the news in that way.
Right.
And the only thing that will change that is when Donald's policies hurt these people in a very visceral way. And a lot of them are going to have to be badly hurt. And I feel terrible about that. I don't take any joy in saying what I just said whatsoever. I'm just a realist about this after almost 60 years of doing this.
Yeah.
The people who have been conned, it's very hard to admit you were taken. There are people who committed suicide, who've gone to prison, and some of them people I exposed, and died in prison because they couldn't bring themselves to realize and admit they'd been conned. They may have realized it, but they couldn't admit it.
Right.
And Donald is brilliant about that. He's now compromised so many people, and they will look so foolish if they come around. But I think over time, enough of them will that we can get change. But we can only get change if the Democrats have a real strategy and plan to reach out and say things will be better under us, and we'll show you how. And the most crucial element to that is you got to have a plan to raise the wages of Americans. And that, as Pope Francis taught right when he became Pope, is unions. The Pope wrote, there is no economic justice without unions.
Yeah, it's I couldn't. I mean, you couldn't have said it better because, but it can't be said better. That's exactly the point. Is that the people have to be lifted up in some way, and the Democrats have to get that message across. In order to do that, they actually have to get that message across. They have the message. They have to figure out how to get it out there, and they haven't been very good at it, as we touched on earlier. And they're up against somebody who, in that same Atlantic interview, said that, when talking about due process and people being deported without due process, well, there are going to be some mistakes here and there.
And Donald actually said we can't have a trial for everybody. Well, I'm sorry.
Right,
yes, you have to have a trial for everybody. That's
exactly
the system.
That's the system. That's the Constitution. But he's also saying I can run for a third term. He's also saying that we have to put in English as an official language. That there are so many things that that the birthright citizenship isn't constitutional when it is. So these are all the hallmarks of dictators, and we're seeing it. And then discrediting the press is where it all starts as well.
Yeah.
So.
Tony's question that was up in the Chiron just a minute ago.
Yeah.
The thing to pay attention to about Ukraine is that Donald Trump wants peace on Putin's terms. He continues to mouth the ridiculous argument that Ukraine started the war, and his idea that you have to give us mineral rights in order to get our protection. It tells you that Donald Trump is a criminal. That's what criminals do. Hey, you don't want your windows broken in front of your nice department store with all those figures, mannequins in the window? Well, you better pay us some protection. That's what this is about. And in all the things Donald is doing, that's how it works. And, every day I get emails from the Trump people saying, Donald has a gift for you. You can get this or that item, and then you go to it, as I always do, to check. And sure enough, it says send $25 or $50, and then you can get your gift. That's not a gift. Donald has no idea what a gift is. He's not disclosing his finances as the law requires. And, mark my words, there's a very high chance that when he finally has to pay in the two big civil fraud cases, the state of New York case and the E. Jean Carroll case, that while the check will be written to the victims by an insurance company, the repayment of that debt will really probably come from Elon Musk. Elon Musk, somewhere in the background, is the guarantor of at least some of that money.
Yeah, or he just keeps selling these coins and he can pay it off himself. But I agree with what you're saying, you know. But
Spend
that
his own
again,
money, Donald?
yeah.
What, spend your own
But,
money?
but again, I mean that then it's a whole new conversation about emoluments and nobody making more money off their presidency. This has never been seen before. It just keeps going and going, and we could sit here for more than all day and talk about it. And I could sit with you, David K. Johnston, all day and talk about just about.
Well, I got to go to the gym with my trainer and work out.
All right, go do that. That's after 6 decades, nearly 6 decades in this business. David K. Johnston, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.